Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices dedicated to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Our speakers today are Mr. Michael Fulilov, who spent 20 years as U.S. Navy SEAL, leading cross-functional teams conducting complex special operations throughout the Middle East. He also spent 5 years at the Naval Special Warfare Command, where he was responsible for coordinating multi-intelligence disciplines with special operations expertise to defeat hostile networks and violent extremist organizations. Our speaker also is Ms. Rouslana Yaroslavsky, who is the Executive Director at Coordinating Council for Refugees in Seattle, Washington. She is an experienced professional with unique cross-functional expertise in project management with human and family services industries. Over to you, Rouslana.
I am representing Coordinating Council for Refugees. It is a new organization we formed because of the crisis and in response to the crisis. I think I will share screen. So that's us. What we do, we are bringing together resources, information, and organizations with the hope and with the goal to help refugees to live a normal and productive life in Europe or in the United States. And because we are registered in the United States, our focus right now is to bring refugees to the United States and to make sure that they have services and they have access to education and tools available in the United States. So this is the team. In my presentation, I used real life pictures of the team that worked in Tijuana, Mexico. We had a refugee camp that was formed near Mexico border, literally under San Isidro Bridge. It started with 150 people in tents. And we ended up serving 3,000 refugees in the sport complex in Tijuana. So this is the people, this is a team that worked on the ground in Mexico to make it all happen. And this is a project management meeting that we put together to organize Tijuana hub, to bring beds, bunk beds, to bring mattresses, to organize food deliveries, to put together children corner and the children activities for kids who were there for 3 to 5 days. So again, all the pictures I'm using in my presentation are real life pictures and real life people who did a job on the ground. And if you have to disconnect from the presentation, I included QR codes, so you can use QR code with your handheld device and go into our programming and descriptions of the programs this way. Our goal was, when we formed Coordination Council for Refugees, our goal was to turn chaos, which is surrounding right now all the refugees movements and services and availability and accessibility of the services, turn this chaos into actionable data and act on actionable data. What we do as a team, we gather and analyze data, we provide resources, and we follow up with refugees who are crossing the border. At the moment, we have about 6,000 emails and phone numbers of people who are currently in the United States after crossing the border from Mexico. We know where they are, we know what they're doing, and we know what kind of help they need, from housing to training to schools to summer camps for kids. So this way we feel that we're not only coordinating during the border crossing, but we also know what's happening with people in Sacramento, in East Coast, in Washington. At any given moment, we have exact information about Ukrainian refugee in Mexico as well. We have information about their health needs and about demographics that we're serving. So if you can take a look at the graph, and the graph is as of Friday, I'm still putting together the information for this week. So you can see that blue represents people who are waiting in Tijuana, and red represents people who are waiting in Mexico City, in the hub in Mexico City. And we have Mexico City arrivals per day. So as you can see, maximum arrivals we had in Mexico City hub was 28th and 29th of April. And those arrivals went way down. At the moment, we have about 20 people arriving per day to Mexico City hub. And for the last 2 days, we celebrated the fact that 83 people were allowed to cross United States, and we helped them to purchase tickets, and they're now either in United States or on the way to United States by plane. That was very exciting for us. So, but that's basically what we do with data. We put it together, we look at trends, we look at how many people we're serving, we look at how many people are arriving, and we see where we have to dedicate resources more. As you probably know, we are dealing with brand new program that Biden administration implemented as of end of April. And this brand new program assumes that people have access to computers and they have sponsors who can do the form, who can fill up the form online and get permission and get people going this way. So we use data to focus our efforts. First thing we did when the program was implemented, which was April 26th, we decided to reach out to all our refugees and figure out who has sponsors and who does not, and where we need to focus our efforts, finding sponsors and explaining to sponsors what their responsibilities are and what liability they might have by sponsoring Ukrainian families. But before we do that, we obviously wanted to have an idea how many people arriving to Mexico, starting from 27th of April, do not have sponsors. And this graph represents that, as you can see, the maximum number of people arriving to Mexico did not have sponsors. 60% of them did not have sponsors last week, as of May 3rd. So unless you have this data and unless you can clearly see this data, you don't know which problem you need to address as an organization. That's why we rely on it before we move volunteers and before we kind of shift our efforts this way or another. As I told you, we use our knowledge and data, as well as power of our networks, to advocate on behalf of refugees, especially a vulnerable population. We have a lot of children and women and elderly, as you can see. We help them with housing, we help them with food, and we help them with basic needs. Those two pictures, you will see literally a huddle meeting, project management meeting in the beginning of the day in Tijuana hub. That's how Tijuana hub functioned. Every day started with huddle meeting, understanding who is responsible for which part of the hub, who is doing cleaning, who is doing supply run, who is doing entertainment programs for kids. So this is a whiteboard that we used on the second level of the hub. And this is a team that presented the job for the day. The second picture is our volunteer, Shapira. She was one of the people helping vulnerable population and people who did not have phones or access to computers to do documents. This lady is 80 years old. She is from South Ukraine. She had to evacuate with her son, who was disabled. And they obviously didn't have computer access, and Anna was handling all their paperwork, all their documents. And when I was going back to Seattle, after volunteering in the hub, I was actually bringing them, and we were traveling together in the airplane from San Diego to Seattle. I know where they are. They're in King County, South King County in Kent with their friends. They're in safe place and they're adjusting right now just well. So that is just happy ending to one of our stories. We address the needs based on data, as I showed you, and information on the ground. So we have our volunteers working on the ground. We have Oля Krasnych, who is right now in Mexico City. I'm going to be in Mexico City on Monday with 6 other volunteers. So we have real life data, real life stories that we can act upon. Our main projects right now are volunteer coordination. So if you could imagine that with volunteers coming and going, onboarding process is pretty strict, and we have to make sure that people know what they're doing and people know that they're dealing with very vulnerable population. We are providing legal help. As you saw in previous picture, Anna is handling documents, and we have volunteers who are helping right now with online applications in Mexico Help. So that's a big part. We also are collaborating with El Otro Lado. If we need, this is legal firm that is working on both sides of the border, and they're helping us pro bono if we have legal questions about application process. We are helping with resettlement. We actually provide money for people who need money for first weeks if they don't have place to stay. Right now, we are paying for several hotels for families with small children in Mexico City because kids had intestinal problems in the camp and they needed medical help. So we paid several hotel rooms to make sure that they have safe space and they can recover not in the crowded space in the camp. And I am focused right now on Kids Creativity Corner because, as you can see on this picture on your left, this is what we have right now in Mexico City, in Mexico Hub for Kids. Our volunteers went to Costco and purchased those colorful mats for kids. Otherwise, our kids were just on bare ground, and it's very dry right now in Mexico City, as you can see. So at least we had this mat purchased, and we got some donations from churches around the hub of, different toys. But we do not have, unfortunately, structured activities for kids, and kids are there for longer time compared to Tijuana Hub, right? Tijuana Hub, we were serving 2 to 5 days maximum, and they were crossing the border. And Mexico City Hub is serving vulnerable population for, let's say, 3 to 5 weeks, unfortunately, and that's a processing time for them to get documents. Picture on the right was our activities in Tijuana. That's what we set up for kids. And this is in Ukrainian on top. This says Kids Corner. And then we literally had schedule set up for kids for their activities from 8:40 in the morning. The breakfast ended 8:30, and then we had structured activities with lessons all the way till 6 p.m. And that's what I would like to do, and that's my goal for the next week, to set up the center like this for kids of different ages, so they have creative and structured activities over there in Mexico City. I'm bringing with me 6 volunteers. 5 volunteers worked with me in Tijuana to set it up. So I'm hoping that we will be able to make it happen in Mexico City Hub next week as well. So that's about it. I included the links if you would like to learn more about our programs. Again, you can scan it, you can go to our website. If you are up to volunteer at the border, not as much at the border right now, but in Mexico City, you can go to volunteer link, and I'm open to questions.
Well, Rouslana, thank you very much for a very interesting slide production. It was also interesting to note that Detache Kutochek is written in Ukrainian.
Thank you.
The information that I received, excellent. We have it, The Refugee's Dilemma.
Yes, beautiful. Okay, so By way of introduction, I am Mike Fulilove. I work as Chief of Operations for Deliver Fund. Deliver Fund is a 501c3 nonprofit registered in the United States, and we specifically work against human trafficking. Historically, there have been different approaches to human trafficking. Many organizations engage in awareness and education. Others from the NGO sector really focus on restoration and victim services. Law enforcement is the only ones that were able to effectively do rescues legally and ensure that information was utilized in the prosecution of traffickers. However, law enforcement is grossly under-resourced. And from our backgrounds in special operations in the intelligence community and some law enforcement agencies, we saw the opportunity to utilize our experience in countering violent extremist networks overseas. And we saw that we could directly apply that methodology towards other illicit networks, in this case, specifically human trafficking networks. And so we did, pardon me, we take a very much of a market approach insofar as if you look at it from that market approach, you have a supplier and the supply, which is the victim. You certainly have a purchaser, and then you have that connection in the middle. You have that linkage, and that is the human trafficker. So when we looked at it that perspective, unfortunately, there's always going to be vulnerable populations, so there will be a supply. In order to truly address it, you do have to address demand, but that's going to require a values shift on the part of not only Americans, but the global population. So the most effective near-term measure that we could see, other than rescuing victims one by one, because again, when you rescue a victim, you incentivize the trafficker to go recruit another victim, thereby actually making the problem worse in our view. So we thought, let's get rid of the trafficker, decouple supply from demand, and make the market crumble because the equation crumbles. Now that we've got the methodology and all that, our focus is historically been on partnering in a public-private partnership with law enforcement and other stakeholders so that there was a multidisciplinary perspective in addressing the problem. We do that through equipping, training, and advising law enforcement, and then providing programs for survivors, which is our Thrive component. This is where we are across the United States currently. So we focused on the United States because the reality is the American dollar is the one that creates the preponderance of demand for human trafficking victims in all of the human trafficking forms. So we started here, and this is where we've been since 2014. So fast forward to 2021 and the Afghanistan withdrawal by US and other forces. The way that took place was creating a lot of vulnerabilities and vulnerable populations to human trafficking, specifically in the form of child brides to Taliban. We were asked to come in and assist in some of the evacuation efforts. What we did was we were responsible for exfiltrating the Afghanistan girls soccer team. So not to be confused with the women's soccer team, which had been evacuated earlier, but the girls soccer team, as well as part of the girls orchestra. We were very successful in that. We were actually one of the only groups that was able to coordinate and actually fly people out. And then in November, we provided some counter-human trafficking training to Ukrainian law enforcement. As many are probably aware, Ukraine has a high number of orphans. So we were asked to provide some training to help with some of the trafficking there. What is human trafficking? Essentially, it involves the use of fraud, force, or coercion to compel somebody else to do something where they are not going to receive the remuneration for that labor, whether it's sex, domestic labor, whatever the form is. These are the two greater typologies. There is a third type, trafficking in human beings for organ removal, but it's a very small subset, and I'm not going to really cover it today. It's not as pertinent to the refugee dilemma. But what you can see here is that, yes, it takes place in many forms. across the world. And these different venues manifest themselves across the world. As I mentioned before, there's an equation. These are the three parts. What's interesting to find out is the vast majority of the actors are actually business type organized criminal networks, which goes back to our expertise in mapping out the networks so that we can ultimately find those centers of gravity and critical nodes, remove those nodes so that the entire network crumbles. Here's what it looks like globally as a percentage of human trafficking. And why this is important is because when we start talking about refugees, they are an extremely vulnerable population. So they are leaving support networks, moving into countries where they perhaps do not know the language. They have no support networks. They have no legitimate employment. They have questions about shelter. Traffickers know this and they seek to exploit these people. They do it through a variety of means. Lots of it is coordinated online, which comes into our other expertise, which is utilizing data similar to Rouslana and her organization. We use a data-driven approach. So anytime you put something on the internet, you leave a breadcrumb. Well, a single breadcrumb can be connected to another breadcrumb, similar to the way that you see ants moving through different pieces of food. Well, when they're coordinating this online through many of the Facebook and other social media apps, then they are brought into one of these different typologies of trafficking into another country. Where we are currently, we're currently working in Poland, specifically identifying the trafficking of Ukrainian refugees coming through Poland. The reason we chose Poland was simply because they were taking in the greatest preponderance of those refugees at the time, and they still have the largest number. So that is where we could make the greatest impact in our fight. Okay. Where we are. So between March 15th and April 15th, we were able to identify 10 cases where a Ukrainian refugee was being sold online for sex. So that just gives an idea of how quickly this happens. We also saw that there was a 150% increase in searching specifically for Ukrainian women for sex. And then I'll get into a little bit more specific on the 3 websites. But then we've also identified 2 of those criminal networks that I mentioned as being largely involved previously. And our work is continuing on, working with those different partners in Poland and the EU. So this is just an example. So when we look at it globally, there is a clear indicator that the demand for Ukrainian females has gone up significantly since the Russian invasion. We can trace this back all the way back from 2019 to current, and you can see again that there is a drastic increase current related to this specific crisis. So this is kind of, again, pre and post invasion, different areas of the world that are searching for specifically Ukrainian women. As you can see, there's been a shift to where now Saudi Arabia and in Poland specifically, there's a drastic increase for those specific searches. Now here's the really sad part that we found in all of this, the demographics of people. So this was based on IP addresses and location of IPs that we're searching. And in 2 of the 3, you can see that the preponderance of those searches come from the United States. Thus going back to the fact that the United States dollar is the greatest generator of demand for trafficking. And then you can also see that, yes, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, all of these other locations are also receiving a very high percentage of those search results. which gives us indicators that, wow, because the Ukrainian refugees are not going to stay in Poland, they have onward movement into Western Europe. Well, you can see that the demand specifically resides in those final destination countries for these refugees. So to think that they are safe once they get across the border into Poland is incorrect. To think that we might get them to another country where they would be safe is also incorrect. So the vulnerability of these Ukrainians persists. And this is gonna persist as long as this invasion, this war, frankly, goes on, because it's going to continue to displace more and more people. So what are we doing about it? We're working with a number of different agencies in Europe. We're working with some of our partners, specifically Rouslana in Mexico City, so that we can help identify some of this in advance in order to aid in the prevention of the trafficking of this vulnerable population. There are additional concerns specifically related to the orphans, because the European countries were grossly unprepared for this type of event. The registration process, to say it's been ad hoc, is being kind. There is no central coordinating authority. There's a lot of people out there, a lot of NGOs that are doing these registrations, but there is no coordination amongst them. So they might register and say, yes, this person was here, we provided services to this person, maybe even be able to give a date. But after they're out of their care, there is no tracking unless they happen to come across another NGO. And there's, to date, no good way of connecting all of those dots. Orphans are at extreme risk because they don't have people watching out for them. There's already been concern specifically with a former Washington state congressman. He was ostensibly saving orphans from Ukraine, but was not allowing anybody in to see them, would not answer any questions about them. And this was a population of about 60 orphans. So clearly there are people who want to exploit, and I'm not saying that he's going to sell them for sex or labor or anything else, but it certainly begs the question of, if you are trying to work in the interest of helping people, why not provide the information and be transparent about it? And the sad part is there is a pedophilia problem across the world, and those orphans are certainly extremely vulnerable to that. So this is kind of where I am. If anybody has additional information they want to reach out to me about, and other than that, I will turn it over for any questions.
Thank you, Michael. That was absolutely very fascinating presentation. And I'm sure that we're going to have a lot of questions regarding that. You finished 10 minutes sooner than you said that you would. So I guess you are waiting for a lot of questions. My first question is that I would like to ask you, is this particularly common? Because I remember when I was in Lebanon, I met a lot of Ukrainian girls there who, how should I put it, were working as sex workers. When I was doing some research over there. But is there a particular reason why Ukrainian women are so sought after and nothing is being done by the US government?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Dr. Dorek. The reality is, I mean, we can go back to the whole Siberian.com type of thing in the early days of the internet and internet dating. There has always been an attraction for Eastern European women. For some reason that they are deemed to be more beautiful and perhaps more compliant than women from other countries. You know, additionally, because lots of times prostitution and sex work is legal, there can be the perception that, you know, a lot of the women are somehow inured to sex and are going to be perhaps more enjoyable. I will tell you from a trafficking perspective, irrespective of whatever people's feelings are about legalization of prostitution, And research by Cho out of a university in Germany actually highlighted and pointed out the fact that the additive effect as compared to the substitutive effect is much greater when you legalize prostitution. So it actually makes the human trafficking problem worse, because it gives greater access to victims. And I'm sorry, I think I kind of went off on a tangent there, Dr. Dorvat.
No, it's what you are saying. I think it's extremely relevant because things cannot change until they are identified. Once they are identified, then you can start doing programs to be able to implement whatever the decisions are. It really shocked me that somebody in the government would take 60 children. That is really upsetting. I'm going to go on.
I was going to say also that, I think that even with respect to the United States government and bringing in the refugees, all governments will provide some sort of a background and check of some sort on the sponsors. However, most governments are not looking at it from a human trafficking lens. And we saw this on some of the different networking sites that by acting as a sponsor, you could gain access to some of those victims.
I see. Leading on the same point, Rouslana, Jessica got me involved with this when she told me that she know that there were Russian men taking Ukrainian women without any kind of credentials.
Right, I cannot go any deeper because I don't have special training and knowledge how to follow up with the problem. What we observed, we had several families that were mixed passports. For example, there was a woman with 1 or 2 children and male with Russian passport. They had different last names, which is not surprising, right? For example, I personally had different last name in my first marriage. So that is not surprising, but when you see several families like this, Ukrainian woman with 1 or 2 kids and then Russian passport male, and they say that they're married and they're crossing the border because they state that they're mixed family. And of course, border people will allow them in because they state that's one family crossing, right? And that's what happened in Tijuana.
I just want to mention that the Ukrainian government does not allow, and it has been since the beginning of the war, any males between the ages of 18 and 65 to leave. So the border guards do not know that if a male is under 65 and over 18, he has no business being there. That's completely ignored.
Well, I'm pretty sure they do know that, but remember, male is a Russian passport. We have males with Russian passport, and they are not under Ukrainian law. They are not obligated to stay and fight in Ukraine, right?
Oh, in other words, they are not saying that they are Ukrainians and need asylum. They're just tagging along with the women.
They're saying that they're mixed family.
There's no way to validate that.
Yeah.
And that was in the beginning of the process, right? I'm giving you examples that happened in April, not in April, in March even, because Tijuana hub started functioning in the first week of March. And those were cases in March. So of course, the situation is changing right now in front of our eyes, but nobody knew how to deal with those cases. Nobody knew how to react and how to process. And if family is saying we're one family, just 2 different passports, then that's how they're processed.
And basically,
or in the past. Right now, it's different.
Oh, and how has it changed?
It changed because government implemented the program, which is United for Ukraine, and it is completely online application process. And they do check background, and they do require sponsor, US sponsor, to apply first.
Oh, well, that is an excellent procedure. I know.
It's quite different. So
Yeah,
from
that's very,
ad hoc, completely ad hoc process in the beginning of March to completely different process in end of April and May.
that is excellent. Actually, I feel bad about taking your time because we have a lot of questions. So I'm going to turn them over to Jessica. Jessica, could you please continue with the questions?
Thank you, Dr. Durback, and thank you, Michael and Rouslana, for joining us today. Our first question is, racism is one of the problems why people become refugees. How can we ensure the safety of these people at the local level?
The way that I see it from the Deliver Fund perspective, you know, the racism is a little bit different form insofar as they are specifically targeting Ukrainian people, Ukrainian nationals. I'm aware that there are some third country nationals that were looking to be evacuated from Ukraine, and they come from different races and demographics as well. But being non-Ukrainian refugees, we did not take a look at that. I would submit that a lot of the same processes that are applied to Ukrainian refugees would be applied to just about any demographic, though, coming out of the conflict zone.
Thank you very much. Jessica?
Thank you. Our next question is, how do refugees get from Ukraine to the refugee centers in the United States? Do you fully cover these expenses? I believe that's Rouslana.
Okay, no, we do not cover expenses for refugees coming from Ukraine to Poland. And normally Nova Ukraine has several minivans that they're bringing actually people who need help. And maybe Michael knows other companies that are working on the border, but I do know that Nova Ukraine has several cars and minivans going back and forth. People get to Poland and to Germany after evacuating from Ukraine. And there are a lot of NGOs working on the ground in Europe that are helping with tickets to get them to Mexico. From Mexico, we were helping a lot of people with tickets. And there are a lot of other NGOs who are doing the same work. Jewish Federation was helping a lot of Ukrainian families to get tickets from San Diego when we were working on San Diego Mexican border. We worked with Catholic Charities and Jewish Federation, and both organizations helped a lot to pay for ticketing from San Diego and from Tijuana to United States, wherever they were going to their destinations. We're still figuring out the pot of money that we can provide all people who are stuck in Mexico City right now with tickets to United States, but that's, you know, work in progress. So far, we were able to identify funds for 83 people who received okay to go into United States with online application process, and all 83 people were successfully on the way or already in the United States. That was a process.
Our next question is, where and how can I approach someone if I expect my refugee friends may have been affected by human trafficking? Who may I contact for help?
So that's going to depend very heavily on the location. In the United States, there's the human trafficking hotline. I would almost submit, though, that you might want to identify the appropriate local or state authority and report it directly to law enforcement. If it's a minor in the United States, it would go to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Overseas, it is going to be heavily dependent on the country. Unfortunately, there's still not a lot of coordination between all the countries. So it is going to be a challenge. We typically, as Deliver Fund, don't take tips from the public, because we have to work with a law enforcement partner.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, well, first of all, we're grateful to all countries for accepting people who are forced to leave their homes. Are there any stereotypes in the world about refugees, and should they be fought?
I mean, from my experience, all people are very different. I don't see any one type, one stereotype of people worth serving. There are teachers, for example, yesterday in the evening, I was talking to a teacher from Lugansk region who was living with her son on the street. Today, we were able with our social worker to provide tickets to Moscow for her so she can evacuate from Moscow to Turkey and from Turkey to United States or to Mexico. Again, she's a teacher. We saw people who were working in crafts. We saw people who were working as electricians and plumbers. And we don't have any one type of refugees that we can describe. We have single mothers with kids. We have grandparents traveling with special needs children with permit from parents to travel because parents are back in Ukraine fighting. So not from my experience. Michael, what can you share your experience?
I'm kind of in alignment with you there, Rouslana. There, I'm not aware of a specific perception of refugees that needs to be countered. There's always going to be outliers, you know. I mean, with respect to the American system and American politics right now, yeah, you're going to have two varying, differing opinions, but I think that's going to be anywhere that you go.
Thank you. Our next question is there any data about the Ukrainian children who are suffering from trafficking?
Great question. The short answer is no. There is no centralized human trafficking database. Deliver Fund is in the process of developing that. We have the largest database of human trafficking information, the largest human curated database of human trafficking information in the United States. But globally, it does not yet exist. No, we are in the process of working that, but that is going to be one of those projects that takes a lot of time. So sadly, no, there is no really solid data on it.
Thank you for that. Our next question is, how many refugees do you think could be admitted in the next month?
Well, it depends, and the answer is long because it depends mainly on how well the online system works. I can tell you that right now we're dealing, and we have reports from Mexico City that right now we're dealing with system providing wrong birthdays or delaying the letters which were supposed to be submitted by emails to refugees who applied 2 weeks ago. There are a lot of bugs in the system, and I don't think it was done on purpose. I think it was developed too fast. And we feel that we are doing kind of beta testing with all our refugees in Mexico City, if you know what I mean. And there are human errors and there are system errors. And yesterday, Oля Krasnych, our co-president, and a couple of other volunteers put together a letter to State Department, clearly stating what they're dealing with when they're applying to receive the status online. So hopefully that all will be taken into account and those bugs will be fixed. But at the moment, that is what we have to rely on answering your question, right? How well system is designed and how well it's functioning. So it's capacity of the system, not our capacity. That's a problem. We know that administration is supporting officially 100,000 of refugees. And that was official announcement that United States is ready to take 100,000 of Ukrainian refugees. We also know that from Tijuana border, there were about 15 to 16,000 people crossed. We do not know what was the situation in Mexicali, and we do not know what was the situation in Texas, because we also know that there were people crossing border on different port of entries, not only in Tijuana. But depending on the system, I think we can pretty much digest as a country those 100,000 people within several months, if the system is working as it's supposed to. Michael, what do you think?
I would be inclined to agree. I don't think that there's any malice of forethought. I think that anytime that specifically a government has to react quickly, there are going to be significant challenges because government is a very monolithic thing, and you can't turn an aircraft carrier on a dime. It takes several miles and time to do so.
And again, I think the system was developed in such a fast pace. If we think about it from system perspective, right? The war started at the end of February. In the end of April, we have an online system to process Ukrainian refugees and to match them with sponsors from United States. That's a lightning speed for government.
That's true.
Of course we will have bugs, of course we will have challenges, and of course we will have mistakes. And that's how we treat it from our perspective. Our job, we feel, is being partner with the government and provide feedback, what works and what doesn't, and provide the information, what we observe on our end that can be improved.
That's very important. And the government certainly picked the right person from your perspective. And Michael, talking a little bit more about the sexual trafficking. We just had a webinar last week with my students in Ukraine. And besides that, the sexual trafficking, and they also talked about the great deal of difficulty of getting any medical attention. Do you in any way relate sexual trafficking with the needs for meds, and do you work on that?
So if I understand the question, you're asking if there's a tie between the need for medicine and sex trafficking in Ukraine?
Correct.
I am not aware of a specific tie or causal or even really a correlated effect between those two. With respect to sex trafficking in Ukraine, what we are seeing is it's predominantly being conducted against refugees. It's being coordinated before they ever get to the border on social media. And then they are lured into trafficking networks with false promises of either employment or shelter being the two greatest. Inside Ukraine, we are not trafficking, or we're not specifically looking at the trafficking within Ukraine because it's just too unclear. And the majority of the open source reporting I'm seeing is not necessarily trafficking as much as it is sexual assault and violent sexual assault against Ukrainian civilians by Russian actors.
Yes, we have received some horrible photos, and it's also in the webinar. We had two of them of swastikas being burned on the back of women after they were raped. I mean, it's just unbelievable what is going on. And the other question that comes up is there's so many young women that have been raped. What do you do with them? Because they do not want to have the babies of the rapists, but there is very few facilities that would take care of that. Actually, I've been trying to find out, maybe you can find out from the government perspective, whether they can provide some kind of a program.
What I would say is it doesn't necessarily fit into our specific agenda. And while human trafficking networks engage in what is essentially industrialized rape, the rape is something that of an individual refugee is first off something that's absolutely horrendous, and I cannot even begin to imagine. It's not something that falls into our wheelhouse because we are focused solely on the human trafficking component as opposed to the sexual assault, regardless of that particular form. With respect to how to address it, I think that there's absolutely a need for services. I think there are groups that specialize in that. If they are not already, I would encourage them to get engaged in the various countries so that they can provide those services to that particular demographic. On the piece of the government, that is really, and having access to services to terminate that pregnancy, that is really going to be in part the job of those NGOs that are working in that, to try to facilitate the movement of those particular refugees to the countries that allow the termination of that pregnancy, as opposed to moving them to countries where that's not an option.
Thank you. That's very, very informative. I think that if you can help me with some of the programs that you know and send them to me, I will try to see what I can do from the other perspective.
I've heard about a lot of people, a lot of women and children who were forcibly deported to Russia without their free will. Some managed to escape. Is there anything that you can do to get those women and children back?
As I told you yesterday, I had a case when I was talking to a teacher living with her son, and she was from Lugansk region. Her house was completely destroyed. She was in the territory that was controlled by Russian troops. She was petrified, and she couldn't sleep for several days because she was afraid actually of being assaulted and raped by Russians. We were able to connect her, and social worker was able to secure tickets for her. And we are in contact with her all the time right now. So it's case by case. You know, we're trying to not to lose any people that are vulnerable, any people who are crossing the border. But I cannot tell you that it's like one case that will show you how it looks like. It's just one case, and we have to deal with one case.
Basically, from the information that we received, and actually it's on our video, there were over 150,000 young people that were shipped by the Russians to Russia. And that's...
I think, unfortunately, the best thing that people can do is, if they are aware of specific people, that they should inform the consulate, specifically the Ukrainian consulate that's operating in Poland, just by virtue of proximity, so that at least people are aware, and there is a possible mechanism for accountability.
That's an excellent suggestion, because I'm in touch with a couple of government people in Poland. So that is an excellent suggestion. Thank you. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you. Our next question is, a lot of refugees are older people and mums with children who may not know English. Is it difficult for them to overcome the language barrier, and how can they be supported in doing this?
In my experience, pairing them with volunteers and maybe giving them information about English as a second language classes and city colleges would be the best way for them to learn at least basic English. We have friends and volunteers in Europe, especially in the United Kingdom, who are in contact with people crossing the border to Europe, and constantly, guiding them and helping them all the way to United States or to Germany, wherever they're going. They are Russian speaking and Ukrainian speaking volunteers, so that takes care of this part. But again, once they're in Canada or in United States, we feel it's part of our mission to coordinate resources and forces to help them to adjust and to help them live normal and productive life here.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, how do you feel the ending of Title 42 will affect your operations at the Mexico City hub? And will you start admitting refugees from other countries?
This is a great question. I don't have a good answer for you, unfortunately. We're not ready to provide a good answer because we don't feel that it's going to be beneficial to other refugees to be mixed with Ukrainian culture and with people who do not speak the language and who do not understand the culture, and same vice versa. They are running from different set of problems, and they are facing different issues, right, and different dilemmas. Ukrainian refugees at the moment have pretty clear paths to United States. I do not know legal paths for other refugees, so I'm not in a position to comment on that. But I think that probably we should not mix those two groups for safety of both groups. Also, volunteers that are working right now in Mexico Hub, remember, they're all Russian and Ukrainian descent because they feel strongly about it personally. And they're volunteering because they feel that they either saving part of their family or part of their own. It's community rising. That's what you see. And it probably would be more productive if we see community rising and supporting of their own for South American refugees and for people from Haiti and for people from Africa. They have similar background, cultural background, language background. It will be easier for them to navigate the reality with people from their own community.
Right.
I'm just going to kind of foot stomp on that if you give me a moment, Jessica. The Ukrainian refugees are at an extreme disadvantage. Not that all refugees are not, but to mix other refugees, and we'll take specifically from Haiti and Central and South America, would create an additional risk of trafficking specifically of the Ukrainian refugees. And I say this not only because Mexico City, for instance, is in an area that is controlled by cartels. And cartels are already shifting into using human trafficking as a line of business, similar to guns and drugs. So by mixing in other demographics, specifically from that region, you are creating an opportunity for a cartel to input somebody so that for the purposes of human trafficking.
That is a particularly excellent awareness and observation. I mean, I would not have thought about that, but it's so, and I certainly did not know that Mexico City was the hub of human trafficking.
Well, it's not a hub. It lies, cartels control the vast preponderance of Mexico in different areas.
This has been really a very fascinating webinar, and I'm so grateful that Jessica was able to arrange both of you to come here. I would appreciate very much if you could email me the information, and I can email you the information about the person Roman, whose parents were Russian, but they came to United States many years ago. He has been phenomenal in helping us provide service by sending all the med kits and everything else to Ukraine. And his program is We Shield. I will send you information. Thank you very, very much. And Jessica, thank you very much for hosting. And I really hope that we'll have an opportunity to talk with you again. And in the meantime, I wish you a very peaceful and safe day and a peaceful world for our future children. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. Bye.
Bye-bye.